We want our kids to be well adjusted. We want our kids to be kind of adjusting to whatever's happening. Then, show them how.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Ask Me Doctor Season 3, a health video series for you and your family. I'm Mahira Khan from motherhood.com.my. Across the world, due to the spread of the coronavirus disease or COVID-19, children are affected by physical distancing, quarantines, and nationwide school closures. Some children may be feeling more isolated, anxious, bored, and uncertain. They may feel fear of grief over the impact the virus has on their families. So today we'll speak with Katyana Azman, resident child psychologist at Pantai Hospital Kuala Lumpur, to help us recognize signs of mental fatigue in our children as well as advice on how we can help them. Hi Katyana, how are you today?
Good, Mahira. How are you?
I'm great. So as you know, we have a lot of interesting questions for you coming up on the topic of lockdown fatigue and mental health stress in children. So shall we get started?
Yes, we shall.
All right, so my first question for you is, what is lockdown fatigue?
So as the name suggests, fatigue just means overtired, right? So lockdown fatigue means just being very tired and very overwhelmed and very lethargic over the idea of the lockdown and all of the restrictions imposed upon it. So lockdown fatigue is responsible for a lot of the downturn we're seeing with regards to the mental health of not just adults but also children, because there's been a lot of impact brought on by these lockdowns on these kids. So I think that overall people are getting, we've been doing this for almost 2 years, so I think people are starting to get very, very tired of the overall lockdowns themselves.
Thank you. Well, my second question for you, how does lockdown fatigue affect our children?
So there's a couple of ways, right? I think from the mental health perspective, definitely that being locked indoors, not being able to socialize, which is something that is an important developmental step or a developmental milestone for children, to be able to learn and interact with their peers, especially little ones, is something that the lockdowns have kind of prevented kids from doing, right? So we're seeing a lot of kids nowadays, especially now that schools are slowly reopening, we're seeing a lot of kids not really know how to socialize in the appropriate way. We're seeing little kids become quite scared of other kids, because if you're short of 2 years old, your entire life has been in lockdown. They don't know anything different from this. So we're seeing a lot of kids who are struggling from the socialization perspective. We're also seeing especially children who are of school age really finding it difficult to adjust to the extended virtual learning that we've been doing. And so kids are, what we're talking a lot about, something called learning loss, right? So they're losing out on important things in school, especially when you're in an exam year. And so I think from an academic, social, and mental health perspective, the isolation and the lockdowns have not been good for children. But I think overall, it's just the fact that we don't have really a lot of answers, do we? We can't really tell our kids when this is going to end. And so because of that, there's a lot of anxiety that kids are having to deal with. So it hasn't really been good, unfortunately, so far.
Yeah, like I have friends who recently just gave birth to a baby as well, and the baby is about a year old. And the issue is because they live in an apartment, so they're only enclosed in those 4 walls. So whenever they bring the baby outside of the apartment, the baby gets like anxious and starts to cry. So they're not, because she's not used to seeing other adults.
Other people,
like you were saying. And then with the issue of school learning, I think a lot of parents are frustrated with that as well, because it's not just the kids who have a hard time learning online, but the parents as well. All right, great. So my next question for you is, does excessive screen time affect kids' mental health?
Yes. So when we look at, again, I was talking about sort of the little ones. So when I say little ones, I mean sort of like toddlers to early primary. Excessive screen time is actually not good for their development. So there's a lot of research coming out that talks about how screen time affects not just speech development, it also affects socialization skills. We're seeing a lot of kids coming up with vision issues because of all the screen time they're getting and the access to blue light. So there's a lot of complications that come up from screen time for the little ones. But I would say for the teenagers, there's an added complication where I think social media is creating a lot of issues for teenagers, because their brain is not developed enough to be able to argue that, chances are these photos are doctored, they are photoshopped. Not everybody's lives are as perfect as what is seen on social media.
So there's like this start of comparison, is it?
Yes, especially with teenagers, because I think that whatever they're exposed to on all these social media platforms is all about perpetuating that image of perfection. And so when they realize that their life is not as interesting or as glamorous, or they don't look like those people they're following, which like I said, is most of the time doctored and edited, it starts to impact upon not just their mental health, but their body image, issues. It impacts upon their self-esteem.
Right.
So there's a whole other world of complications that can come in. But unfortunately, it's how these kids are engaging with the outside world.
Yeah.
So, it's great that we're now able to see our country kind of open things up more. We're talking about travel, kids are going back to school. But, the impact over the last 2 years has not been easy and not been great.
All right, so my next question for you. How can we recognize signs of anxiety or depression in children?
So the advice I'm giving to all parents is to look for change.
Right.
Reason being why I'm giving such a vague sort of guideline to look for is because you might not have a child who is old enough to tell you, Mom, this is what I'm feeling, Dad, this is what I'm feeling. You might not get a child who is that verbal or conversant or eloquent just because of how old they are, or even just personality. They might be more introverted. So they might not be the kind of person who can tell you verbally what the issues are. So looking for changes is always a really good first step. And when I say changes, it can be anything. They could have different sleeping patterns. They could have different eating patterns from what they normally used to do. They might not want to socialize with their friends when they're normally quite happy to play online games or to socialize. All of a sudden they don't want to anymore, or gradually they don't want to anymore. If there's someone who's usually quite chatty, now it's something that's different. Academics, you're seeing changes. Any type of change from what your child used to do and what your child used to be like is a red flag, right? Especially if you're also getting similar complaints from the teachers and grandparents and other people showing that these changes are kind of consistent, so we're seeing them everywhere, is a really good first sign for parents to look for. So it need not be exactly identical to what you see on the internet. Because that's something I see a lot of parents do. They will go online and they'll look up symptoms.
Start Googling.
Symptoms,
right?
Yep. And then they start going, well, my child doesn't look like that. And then they think there's no concern. Your child might do the opposite, but if it's a change, it's worth speaking to a professional just to make sure that it's not something more serious.
Right.
So change is a really good thing to look out for.
How can we tell the difference between challenging behaviors and emotions that are a normal part of growing up versus those that are cause for concern?
So the first thing, like I mentioned earlier, is consistency, right? So if your child is behaving the exact same way with everybody in their life, chances are it's something noteworthy, meaning it's something you probably should look into. But if you're seeing a child who's only acting up, for example, in certain environments, so for example, only with mom and dad, or only at school, or only when they're being told no, or when they don't get their way, that's probably behavior, right? Because the criteria for any type of disorder is consistency, so everyone should see the same version of this child. But if your child is behaving differently in different settings, it means that they have the capacity to regulate, meaning they know, I can't behave this way here because there's a consequence maybe. So children who have a disorder, it's kind of like having an illness. So if you have diabetes, for example, you can't switch the diabetes on or off. It's that way regardless, right? So it's the same with issues with regards to children. If your child has anxiety or depression, they can't edit it to suit the environment. They might be better at hiding it, but overall you're going to start seeing the same things manifest everywhere. So if it's something that's dependent on the situation or dependent on whether or not they're getting their way, and because you guys were saying no as parents, then it's probably behavior. But if it's consistent everywhere, definitely start looking at professional help for that one.
All right, so my next question for you, Katyana, is how can we help our children to deal with this ongoing lockdown while maintaining their mental health and well-being?
So, I tell parents it is a difficult time, right? I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that we should all just adjust, right? It is a very difficult time. And so I think embracing that is a really good thing for families, right? To not kind of expect the kids to just be very good at this lockdown, just as much as we don't expect each other to be very good at this lockdown. So keeping open communication with your kids, checking in with your kids. I'm a big fan of having dinner time meals. I don't think a lot of families do that very much anymore. Everyone's on their devices. Some families even have dinners in different times in different parts of the house. So I'm a big fan of putting your phones away. It is a device-free zone when you're at dinner, sitting down, catching up on everybody's day, catching up on how everyone is feeling, talking about the routines and plans for the next day. These are all things that I think are really important. This open channel and platform for communication is super important for teens, regardless of whether you're in a pandemic or not. And so what that does is allows parents to get a little bit of insight into where their child is emotionally, so they can kind of pick up on problems. But also just kind of try to, do as many things to install or instill as much normalcy as possible. So you might not be able to, for example, go to a concert, right? Right now that's not really possible. But you can still, for example, go to the movies if everyone is vaccinated, or go to the mall, or go to the park, or, pitch a tent in your living room and have a little camping trip, right? I think that it is still possible to bring back some normal activities, and to just kind of do them as often as possible, so that at least kids feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And if you as parents set the tone and show that, hey, I don't really like this, but I'm making the best of it and I'm overcoming my anxiety, you're showing your children that they can do the same. But if we're not talking about how we feel, and we're not talking about our mental health, and we're telling them they should do this and should do that, you're setting or communicating the wrong messages to our kids. So it all starts with us. So if we want our kids to be well adjusted, we want our kids to be kind of adjusting to whatever's happening, then show them how.
I hear a lot of the same thing, which is communication. Communication is very important when it comes to your children. I think it's important to communicate with your children, whether it's a normal situation or whether you're going through a hard time, right?
Yes,
I think that communication is key
Yes.
between parent and child to sort of building up this very stable and happy mental state.
Yes, because their first interactions are always going to be with parents, right? So if you're not encouraging or showing your child how to have healthy communications in that dynamic, they're not going to know how to do it with friends or partners or teachers, or so on and so forth. So I think that as parents, there's a very powerful role that parents play in how children learn to communicate and express themselves. So we're all locked indoors, so the best time to do that is now.
And I like how you pointed out that during this pandemic, we're all going through a hard time. Whether you're a family or whether you're an individual, everyone's going through their own hard time. So to be able to openly talk about that to your children and sort of like come out together stronger as a family, as a unit, rather than expecting perfection in the situation.
Right? And you're teaching your children resilience, right? Because you're showing your children that this is a difficult time and we're overcoming it. You're again setting the stage for kids. So I think that also parents need to part away from this fear that admitting to struggle shows a sign of weakness, and that your kids are not going to respect you if you just admit that mom's not having a good day today. It actually shows the opposite. You're showing your child that you struggle as well, and therefore struggle is normal, and you're showing your child that you're being constructive and you talk about it, and so therefore they can do the same. So there's no harm, in my opinion, from having communication or healthy communication with your children. Even though I guess culturally we've been taught that it's going to make your kid disrespect you, but that's not really true.
I think it takes a certain level of strength to be able to openly talk about hard times that you're going through.
Absolutely.
And I think it shows strength as well as a parent to any sort of individual. So thank you so much, Katyana,
You're very welcome.
for answering all my questions. I really enjoyed talking to you. And a special thanks to our sponsor, AIA Malaysia, for sponsoring this episode of Ask Me Doctor. As parents, I'm sure that access to good healthcare and adequate protection are among our top priorities. AIA's new Total Health solution supports families to live well with AIA Vitality, protect well with its comprehensive and innovative product solutions, and get well with its differentiated healthcare services that support you all the way to recovery. Visit aia.com.my/anakkuhebat to explore exciting activities, offers, and more. We hope that you enjoyed today's program. Stay tuned for more upcoming videos on Ask Me Doctor. Thank you so much for watching, and see you again soon. I'm Mahira Khan.
And I'm Katyana Azman.
And this is motherhood.com.my. Bye!